now, minivans are some of the most popular vehicles on the roads. But will the seats in some of the top sellers protect you in a minor crash? Or are you in for a car seat catastrophe? A recent $100 million judgment is fueling a debate about millions of potentially dangerous minivans.
CBS 4 consumer investigator Al Sunshine has exclusive details.
Josh was sitting behind the passenger side, and that seat collapsed back and hit him in the head.
It didn't look like an especially bad accident 7 years ago. A speeding pickup slammed into the back of this minivan near Nashville. The difference in speed between the two vehicles, 15 miles an hour. But the impact was enough to send the front passenger tumbling backwards into the rear compartment, where 8-month-old Joshua Flax was belted in his safety seat. The infant was crushed under the passenger's weight. He died several days later from massive head injuries.
15 miles an hour will collapse that seat. No question about it. It's already happened. It's a matter of history.
And Paul Sheridan insists he knows his minivan history. He used to head Chrysler's minivan safety program until he was fired in 1994. Sheridan's testimony in the Flax case late last year convinced a Tennessee jury that the Chrysler minivan seat that bent backwards in the accident was defective. It returned a $105.5 million verdict against Daimler Chrysler.
You should have crumpled fenders, but no one should die in a 15-mile-an-hour impact.
How susceptible, in your professional opinion, are many older Dodge, Chrysler, Plymouth minivans to that type of seat failure?
If I was a betting man, I'd say you're approaching 100% failure rate. All of them will fail.
Sheridan estimates there could be as many as 7 million Dodge, Chrysler, and Plymouth minivans still on the road with the same exact front seat design that allowed Joshua Flax to be crushed to death. This minivan crash test shows what can happen when it's hit from behind during a simulated 15-mile-an-hour accident. The force of the rear impact sends the driver's body slamming against the front seat back. And as you can see, it allows the driver to fall backwards into the rear passenger compartment and onto whoever may be seated there.
I've seen tragedies of severe injury where people are becoming permanent quadriplegics, and in other cases people have been killed because of the seat standard being completely inadequate.
Daimler Chrysler is now appealing the verdict. In a statement shortly after the trial, the company insists that its minivan seats meet all required U.S. safety standards and even exceeds them.
The seats in question, we have an internal standard that we always exceed, and our internal standard is 3 times that of the government standard.
The safety standards have not been updated since they were put on the books 40 years ago.
Miami attorney David Bianchi says he sued Chrysler many times over its minivan seats. Bianchi says even he doesn't know how many cases it settled out of court, since those agreements are usually confidential.
Almost always, when they settle these cases with the families who have lost somebody, they insist on a confidentiality provision that prevents the families and the lawyers from talking about the case.
But Paul Sheridan says that's not all. He claims this official U.S. government crash test aimed at identifying rear hatch failures on Chrysler minivans some 2 decades ago also found crash test dummies violently thrown into the rear passenger compartment after the front seat fails. He says other government crash test investigations of minivan gas tanks also found the same results.
So here you have the United States government conducting tests where, in an unrelated test mode, the seat backs on all of the Chryslers are failing.
Sheridan charges that the original findings were never publicly released by the U.S. government. He says they only came to light during recent lawsuits.
They wanted to make sure that this entire investigation was hidden from the general public.
Why?
Well, because they had in fact confirmed what my safety team had been saying about latches and about seat backs.
Critics have long argued that current U.S. seatback safety standards do not adequately protect the public from serious injuries and even relatively minor rear-end accidents.
A garden variety lawn chair that you can buy at Walmart or Kmart and put out in your backyard will pass the seat standard.
Okay, how often are seats failing in local South Florida accidents?
It's only one little piece of metal right here. This is the part that breaks.
For more than a decade, Johan Fu's been in the business of tearing down South Florida wrecks and reselling the parts.
I can say like 50% of accident, the seat breaks on the back.
And despite the growing concern over seatback failures, the federal government late last year stopped all rulemaking on the issue following pressure from U.S. car makers. Some auto safety researchers, including Rider Trauma Center's Dr. Jeffrey Augustine, says tougher seatbacks, which don't collapse in accidents, could actually cause more injuries.
Because you may make it too tough, and therefore you'd get more neck injuries.
But Paul Sheridan disagrees. He says for just a few extra bucks, car makers can make safer seats which absorb crash impacts without allowing front passengers to crush anyone sitting behind them.
$10 and the accident that occurred up in Nashville, for example, we wouldn't have gone to court. They would have been protected.
They said that if they had had seat backs in there that were available then to Chrysler, that Josh would not have died. He would not have even been injured.
This is strictly to get this to be known so that nobody else has to go through what I've gone through.
Chrysler continues to insist that its minivan seats exceed all current U.S. safety requirements, and Chrysler is appealing that $105.5 million verdict. And tonight, federal safety officials continue to urge parents, keep your kids safely belted up in safety seats in the back. In Doral, I'm Al Sunshine, CBS 4 News, tonight.